How do I not fit the job description? I'm a cocky, wisecracking main character who fights an endless army of cool enemies with style, and my music is full of crazy guitars and cheesy vocals. What am I missing? All right, I get your point, lady. And tell your boss to unblock me.
I love Sonic. Embarrassing, I know. If you've watched this channel, then you likely already knew that. But you know what I love almost as much as Sonic? Big, dumb action games. And I'm not talking about your silly point-and-click adventures like your Fortnites and your Minecraft gun mods, although I do really love some shooters like Doom and Titanfall 2. I'm talking about stupid, over-the-top, crazy character action games. The title is a little weird. Sometimes they're also called hack and slash games or spectacle fighters, but that gets them confused with other things, and look, genres are weird, so I'm just going to refer to them as action games rather broadly for the rest of the video. So, what's an action game? Since I'm assuming most of the audience right now are Sonic fans, I'll try and make this stuff really clear. I'm talking about third-person, combat-focused titles like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry, where you're given an extremely versatile and expressive selection of moves that provide the opportunity to wreak havoc on your enemies in the most over-the-top, ridiculous ways possible. The protagonists are incredibly powerful heroes who are often highly confident, campy, and generally entertaining to watch, but also have a strong sense of justice and a bit of a soft side. The tone is usually quite light, not taking itself too seriously, but the stakes will rise where appropriate to make the player feel challenged, but still very powerful. Stages are often quite linear and contain stunning set pieces and fun cutscenes, but also have secret areas with highly rewarding goodies and additional challenges. The soundtracks are loud and in your face, with character-based vocal themes often accompanied by big bands and orchestras. Combat is incredibly flashy and stylish, making the player look and feel like an unstoppable god once they've mastered the mechanics. Most enemies can be juggled in the air and played with like toys once you've gotten good enough, while bosses can be enormous demons, angels, or robots with multi-phase fights that constantly evolve and demand more from the player. While it may be very impressive to look at, this isn't a style of game where you just blindly mash buttons to succeed. You might be able to safely make it through the first half of some action games on their lower difficulties without remembering any combos or particular inputs, but these titles are designed to test your skills and push you to do better, often with bosses and enemies made specifically to teach you how to use certain mechanics. Once you've mastered the movesets, you'll be performing launches, juggles, jump cancels, parries, and oh so satisfying taunts to truly dominate the battlefield in style.
Man, I'm bored.
The first playthrough is more of a tutorial for the higher difficulties that you unlock afterwards, where you can put all of your weapons to the test and prove your skill. Ranking systems are a huge part of encouraging the player to do better and show off, often seen as pure platinum trophies or S ranks. This all sounds pretty familiar. Okay, but why Sonic? Obviously I wouldn't want this style of gameplay to replace the main series, but Sonic's cocky attitude, complete with colourful worlds, fast-paced gameplay, and a variety of giant robot bosses to fight would make him a perfect fit for the world of ridiculous action games. The best Sonic games are already about mastering his speed and movement options to blast through the stages as quickly as possible, getting tons of points and higher ranks as recognition of your abilities. It's really not that far off from action games in this regard. The Sonic series has attempted similar concepts before, like with the slight combat focus in Sonic Heroes, and the God of War style werehog gameplay of Unleashed. But these were all handled by Sonic Team, and were intended as new entries into the main platforming series. What I want is a spin-off, directed and developed by the people who know exactly what they're doing. So no, I don't want this to be handled by Big Red Button, even if this pitch may actually remind you a lot of Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. Why PlatinumGames? Platinum are basically the one studio dedicated solely to making games like this, and were also somewhat responsible for creating the genre in the first place. Hideki Kamiya, chief game designer at Platinum, directed the original Devil May Cry at Capcom, which set the standard going forward for this style of action game. I'll be mentioning the later Devil May Cry games, or at least DMC5 a lot, even though it isn't a Platinum game and had no involvement from Kamiya, because it's an evolution of the same concepts that he created 2 decades ago, and is also just insanely good, probably the best in the genre at the moment. Years after the original DMC, Kamiya went on to found PlatinumGames and direct Bayonetta, along with being involved in many of the company's other titles, directing The Wonderful 101 and acting as supervisor for many other games, like Bayonetta 2 and Astral Chain. All of these games have, in some regard, maintained Kamiya's vision of stylish, spectacular action that challenges and empowers the player. So that's exactly why I think this studio is the best choice to handle this hypothetical Sonic game. Out of Platinum's entire catalog, Bayonetta is easily my favourite, and Transformers is basically just a different, simpler take on Bayonetta, while Metal Gear Rising, it's kind of its own unique thing that still feels pretty similar to the standards set by DMC back in 2001. Vanquish maintains the core values of Platinum while still being a third-person shooter, but it definitely lacked in terms of overall variety. Nier Automata, or Nier Automata, is easily my least favourite game from the studio that I've played so far, since the combat was actually one of the worst parts about it. Considering this wasn't really a Platinum game and was more of a Yoko Taro Square Enix game, I don't hold it against them very much. I haven't played The Wonderful 101 or Astral Chain, but I would like to get to them at some point. So, if we're connecting this back to Sonic, it's worth mentioning that Platinum has already established a great relationship with Sega. Bayonetta is a Sega IP. And hey, Sonic's crossed over with Bayonetta more than once. There's also the numerous Sonic references in the games, whether intentional or otherwise, and loads of other Sega-based callbacks.
Welcome to my fantasy zone.
Unbelievable. We managed to stop this abomination, and it's still going to destroy the world.
John! I'm okay!
Now, Shadow!
Let's go! Just stay close to me!
Maria, this is what you wanted, right? This is my promise I made to you.
Even old Eggman the Destroyer gets scrambled in the end, right?
Forgive me, Eggman! I didn't mean all that Humpty Dumpty shit!
Look, if these guys can make a super fast melee fighting game work with Transformers, I think they can easily do the same for Sonic. Platinum have also very recently expanded with a new Tokyo studio, and are developing a variety of upcoming games, some of which still have yet to be announced. And then there's Bayonetta 3, which, yes, I'm still desperately waiting for information about. It's been over 2 years since I screamed at the top of my lungs watching that announcement.
What a Platinum man?
Wait, is this? No!
Wait.
No! No! No!
No.
Is it Bayonetta 3? Oh my god!
Damn!
At the time of recording, the final entry of the Platinum 4 has yet to be revealed, and neither has the next Sonic game, and while I'm in no way saying that we'll see this game announced anytime soon, I'm at least acknowledging that it's technically possible. I still want a momentum-driven 3D platforming Sonic game to be announced, or a Mania sequel, but hey, some kind of action-driven Sonic game like this would still make me incredibly happy. Alright, so, how would it play? Well, let's start by pulling from all the different combat systems on offer from these other titles and any new ideas that I can make up. Unfortunately, this is all hypothetical, so you might have to use your imagination a little bit, but I'm going to make the on-screen footage as relevant as possible to the ideas I'm talking about. For starters, let's nail down how Sonic should play before mentioning any other characters, so we can use Sonic as the standard and make changes from there. I think it's very important to capture the personality of a character in their moveset, like how the more mature and laid-back Dante is all about mastering a huge variety of skills that he uses with confidence and style, but the younger, more frustrated Nero is about imprecise aggression and raw strength. Sonic needs to be incredibly mobile with quick, hard-hitting moves that focus more on jumping around the battlefield with efficiency and grace, rather than with extreme brutality. I think using his ball form as much as possible is essential, making Sonic bounce off enemies like a pinball. Weapons are off the table too, unless we're talking about like a playable Amy, or maybe someone like Omega. All characters would have the standard abilities of most action games. Jumps, double jumps, some kind of light and heavy attacks with combo lists, lock-on, moves that launch enemies, moves that close the distance between you and the enemy, and a dedicated dodge button. Something like Witch Time, a time-slowing ability that rewards perfect timing on the player's dodges, could still work here, but I don't want it to be literally just a carbon copy of Bayonetta's combat. I think with what's already been done in other action titles, Transformers Devastation might actually be the closest to what I'd expect out of a Sonic moveset. It's already heavily based on Bayonetta, it has its own equivalent to Witch Time after all, and many other similar abilities, and some incredibly fast combos. It's got hard-rocking battle themes and a gorgeous cel-shaded art style that I wouldn't mind seeing a Sonic game try out someday. It's also a licensed game with an IP that Platinum had no original involvement in, and it turned out pretty damn good, so I'd hope for a similar outcome if they were given the chance to work with Sonic. Each of the 5 playable characters can transform into a vehicle at any time by holding down the dodge button. Tap to dodge, tap and hold to dodge and transform into a car, and race around the stage, building speed until you're fast enough to perform vicious dash attacks. I don't think it's crazy to picture the vehicle form in this game as a boost or ball form for Sonic, letting him duck under enemies and build up speed before ramming into them hard. The Transformers can even use this as a combo finisher, flinging themselves forwards in what is basically a form of spin dash. Stomping on top of enemies and drilling into them with their vehicle forms, eventually blasting off in a burst of speed, would fit perfectly as a ball move for Sonic as well. Optimus Prime has a special move where he spins on the ground like a tornado, and Bumblebee can zip around enemies by vaulting overhead or sliding underneath and hitting them from behind. These are all perfect starting points for Sonic. I'd love for him to be able to bounce off enemies and then cat himself up back high, kinda like a Badnik bounce, and then slamming back down onto another enemy, maybe even taking them back up into the air with him to finish them off. Other action games have enemy step, or jump cancelling, which simply lets you jump all over enemies in midair and reset your aerial movement, so a bouncy version for Sonic would be ideal and really suit his personality. Some other moves we could pull would be things like Bayonetta's Crow Within, which acts as a homing attack, and something akin to Dante's Trickster style, letting Sonic dash around and avoid enemy attacks. This could be rethemed into existing abilities from other Sonic games like the Quick Step or even the Somersault. His core attacks would likely consist mostly of kicks and a few punches, finishing off combos by ramming into enemies or spinning around them and creating a whirlwind tornado that launches them into the air and removes their armor. He's probably going to need something else, some kind of equivalent to a magic gauge or a devil trigger, that allows him to perform additional, more powerful moves. Perhaps now his tornadoes can stun enemies much easier, and he gains access to larger crowd control moves that deal AoE damage around him, similar to the Team Blasts of Sonic Heroes. As the story mode progresses, Sonic can gather more Chaos Emeralds, with each one offering a new form of upgrade to these special moves. An obvious late game unlock would then be Super Sonic, which could work similar to Dante's Sin Devil Trigger, a far more powerful extra gauge that has a more demanding time limit to avoid abusing it. If enemies drop rings upon defeat, Sonic could use these to charge his super gauge and transform until he runs out, just like in the classic games. The more stylish the player is, the more rings would be dropped by enemies, and the faster they can access Super Sonic. Sonic would obviously have a fun variety of taunts to perform. I mean, he basically does them already in his own games. Tapping his foot, checking his invisible watch, lying down and getting bored, throwing out little quips and insults, anything like this would suit him just fine. I think it would be fun if Sonic really played up the radical feeling of the 90s in this game. Kinda like Nero in DMC5, who does skateboard tricks with his motorcycle sword and flying rocket arm. Enemies would be an assortment of Eggman robots. More animal-like badniks from the classic games would be fighting alongside the more humanoid egg pawns and egg fighters from the modern games, allowing for lots of variety. Bosses would be giant Eggman mechs, and combat would be scored with dynamic music just like in Devil May Cry, where it ramps up the better you play and drops down again when the player starts to screw up. Just like Metal Gear Rising, hype as hell lyrics would come in during the climaxes of bosses, and yes, I fully envision a lot of these songs being performed by Crush 40, but some new themes by other past Sonic composers like T-Lopes, Tomoyo Otani, and Hideki Naganuma would be fantastic as well. Okay, so this all sounds awesome to me so far, but there's one major issue. Every other action game has a variety of different weapons and abilities to switch between, and since I'm ruling out weapons for Sonic, we're kind of stuck with just one moveset. Originally this was a huge hurdle for me, since guns and other projectile weapons are a huge part of juggling enemies in these games. But then I remembered that Transformers Devastation and Metal Gear Rising have really lame projectile weapons, so maybe stuff like that isn't super necessary for all playstyles. Then I realized that there was already an easy way to switch between different unique movesets on the fly. The team system of Sonic Heroes. I always wanted to have multiple playable characters with their own abilities in this game anyway, but I originally envisioned it more as a thing that you just selected at the start of the level. But by using the Sonic Heroes system, all 3 characters, or maybe even more, could be fighting together at the same time, just with one in the lead until you switch to the next. Using speed, fly, and power like Dante's style switch from Devil May Cry, accessed via the D-pad, the player could combo together different moves from Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles seamlessly mid-combo. It's also sort of like Encore mode in Sonic Mania Plus, except in this game you could freely pick any character whenever you want, instead of cycling between 2 available options. Tails would obviously be far more mobile in the air than Sonic, with the moveset focused more on verticality and maybe even throwing around the other characters as projectiles, kinda like in Sonic Heroes. That sorta solves the no guns problem. Knuckles would be a straight up brawler, sticking to the ground most of the time and clobbering enemies with slower, more powerful moves, but also being able to glide through the air and grapple enemies down onto the ground. And to be clear, in this game, if you switch to Tails, you wouldn't have all the characters stacked up on top of each other like a tower, you'd just have Tails in the front of the line, with Sonic and Knuckles standing behind him. All of these movesets could then be slightly recycled for different teams. Say if you wanted Team Dark playable, Shadow would play pretty close to Sonic, except with a variety of Chaos abilities that would likely function a lot like Virgil's moves in Devil May Cry, since Virgil summons floating energy swords that are just like Chaos Spears, and he likes to teleport everywhere. Shadow would also be the best character to have a Witch Time dodge, using Chaos Control to slow down time, or just stop it outright. Rouge would be aerial just like Tails, except with throwable bombs and more focus on kicking, and Omega could be the one character with actual guns and missiles. Team Rose could have Amy throwing a hammer around, maybe even throwing around her teammates with it as well. A simple way to handle health and death would be for each character to have their own health bar, and if it runs out, you lose that character for the rest of the fight and have to use the others left over. Lose all of your characters and you have to restart from your last checkpoint. Or, admittedly, a much simpler solution would just be to have one shared health bar, so you wouldn't lose what are functionally your different weapons if a character dies. It could go either way. I think both are interesting, but it could be frustrating to lose a character and then have less combat options as a result. I should make it clear again that everything in this video is really broad stroke stuff, like obviously the gameplay would need way more thought put into it than what I've done just for this video. And hey, you know what? Just for fun, what if the game let you switch out teams as well? Rather than being a rigid team system like in Heroes and Team Sonic Racing, what if this worked more like a party in an RPG, and you could freely select whichever characters you wanted and assembled your own teams? Obviously the game would need to be designed around this, but I think this could be incredibly fun to mess with, especially if the game didn't force you to have one of every type in your team. You want all speed characters? Sure. All power? Go for it. So long as specific enemies weren't only defeatable with one type, then it would be fine. Obviously the amount of work that would have to go into designing so many characters would be quite immense, but considering that each character, in this instance, is functioning more like a different weapon, and traditional action game characters have loads of weapons to switch between, I hope it doesn't sound too outrageous. This is clearly a very ambitious concept, but I think if pulled off, it would make for an incredible new take on a dynamic, fast-paced combat experience.
Bingo!
The game could be called Team Sonic Smackdown, or something like that. I don't know, someone else think of a better name. What are the challenges of developing this game? Alright, let's be realistic here. This game would take a ton of work and likely would be a bit tricky to develop for, in terms of the traditional Sonic audience of younger kids. Most of the other action games I've mentioned are mature-rated titles, and the combat can get pretty technical, with extremely difficult boss battles and occasionally punishing checkpoints. My only hope is that a game like this could be less niche without simplifying this style of combat, like Spider-Man PS4 did, for example. That game was based off DMC, it clearly shows with the aerial nature of the combat, but it's far more simple than anything you'd see in an actual Devil May Cry game. Likely because it's a hugely profitable IP and publishers think that big stylish action games don't appeal to a mass market. A similar thing probably happened with Nier Automata, and that's why the combat was so boring. Also, I imagine this concept will sound too similar to Sonic Boom to a lot of people, even though in reality it's a totally different idea. I could also see Sega wanting to separate this more as a spin-off by not making Sonic the main character. Maybe this would work better as a game focused on Team Dark or Team Chaotix, but you can still unlock Sonic and a few other familiar faces later on, or maybe just after beating the game for the first time. I wouldn't be against this being centered on a different set of characters, but I still think this game could work brilliantly with Team Sonic as the lead. Writing and general dialogue is another big area that this game could very easily go wrong. Sonic games recently have consistently had awful, cringeworthy scripts filled with terrible jokes and unlikable characters. The problem with action games is that you have to love the protagonist. At least in the case of DMC and Bayonetta, these games rely so heavily on you adoring their main characters. Dante and Bayo are cheesy action stars who play off their enemies beautifully, and I think Sonic should do something similar to this, but not the exact same. I do not want to see a repeat of Sonic Colors where Sonic just stands around doing nothing, making embarrassing jokes in front of giant robots who don't react, let alone speak. Cutscenes in action games are normally a great way of introducing the player character with a flashy sequence of them showing off, to set the standard that the player has to aim for. You should be thinking while watching this stuff, I want to be as cool as that character, basically.
Alright, time to kick some ass.
New enemies and bosses are introduced in cutscenes as well, often providing a quick bit of context as to how they work before making you fight them. Dante and Bayonetta tend to have short conversations with their enemies beforehand, but I think Sonic would simply run in and start bouncing off the enemy and avoiding their attacks straight away. If the boss is Eggman, then Sonic can have a few quick back and forth lines before the fight begins, but overall his cutscenes would be more about introducing the strengths and weaknesses of each new boss by having Sonic run around them, instead of talking to and taunting them.
What? No chit-chat or monologue? Just getting right to the point, huh?
Just my opinion, but I don't think it would fit for Sonic to stand around all smugly and mock his foes for as long as Dante and Bayonetta do, when he could easily just start the fight now and get it over with. Moving on to the next thing. Basically, I just think every boss or new enemy cutscene would play out like a shorter version of the Sonic CD intro, or the Unleashed intro, just getting to watch Sonic running around looking cool. I'm also not too sure how the health would work in this game, like I don't know if the traditional ring system would work well, but I'd like the rings to still be involved somehow, rather than just having a traditional health bar. It's not really a huge deal, but I'd like for the game to feel as faithful to the core series as possible while still maintaining its identity as a spin-off title. Having elements of exploration, gathering the Chaos Emeralds, having a crew of likable characters from the Sonic franchise, all of that would fit really well. Wow, this game sounds so great. What should I do now? Well, unfortunately, this game does not exist, so all I can ask is that you go play Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, all this stuff if you like Sonic, because goddamn is it unlikely we'll actually get a Sonic game like this, even though it would work so damn well. Even if you don't think a Sonic game would truly fit this style, I really love this type of game and want to get more people to try them out. So if any of the footage you saw in this video caught your eye, please go and look further into that game and see if it's right for you. I'd personally recommend maybe starting with Bayonetta 1 or 2. 1 is much harder, sometimes unfairly so, and while it does help to play it first, you can jump into Bayo 2 first without any major issues. 1 goes for dirt cheap on Steam and just got re-released on PS4 with Vanquish as well, whereas Bayonetta 2 is bundled with the first game on Switch, so I'd recommend that too. Devil May Cry is a little bit tricky since the first couple games do not hold up, so I'd say just jump into 3, 4, or 5 if you're interested. It certainly helps to have an understanding of all of the games, except 2, before playing DMC 5, at least in terms of the overall story and lore, but again, I wouldn't say it's mandatory. 5 is easily the best of the series, and I really want everyone to play that game. And yeah, that's about it. I hope this video sparked your imagination somewhat and got you thinking about all the potential that the Sonic franchise has with different takes on high-speed gameplay. We've had Sonic fighting games before, so this isn't really a stretch. And obviously I hope I got you interested in action games if you've never played them before. I put way too much time into that little animation at the beginning. I think I spent more time working on that than I did on the rest of the actual video. But thank you very much to Steve, as always, for voicing Sonic, and the Blue Blur for his amazing Sonic rig. Follow me on Twitter and other junk to see more of the art that I make, including this cool Angel Island Zone diorama that I made a while ago. This was super fun, and I really want to make more pieces like this if I get the time. I'd definitely be moving on to Hydro City and Marble Garden and so on once I get the chance to do those. That's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please go play Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, and thank you very much for watching.
Let's dance, boys!